What's up, guys? It's Damp. I promised you all that I would bring you a video on the best party to tackle each one of the dungeons. So we're going to start with the ruins, and I'm going to walk you through what I feel one of the strongest parties to take into the ruins if you're a newer player, or even if you're advanced and you wanted to try something different. So we'll kind of start and talk a little bit about the ruins and the mobs or monsters you're going to run into in there. So most of you know, if you've been playing the game for a while, you'll primarily run into unholy, which are undead or skeletons you'll run into. You also will run into quite a bit of humans inside of the ruins. So those are really the two primary, I would say, people or monsters you're going to run into. You'll run into things that will bleed, but not blight. The bleeds are manageable pretty easily at lower levels. At higher levels, it becomes a little bit more difficult. Primarily the guys that bleed are really the human mobs that have the Vega claws that will stab you. Those are really the ones that tend to do probably most commonly that you see will bleed in the ruins. So really what would work well in the ruins then is we start to look at some theory crafting. So when you say undead, you know they're going to be resistant to bleeding, but usually that leaves them open to blight. So with that, the Plague Doctor, she performs pretty well here. So we're going to bring her and put her in the 4th slot. When we look at a healing character or somebody who can heal and then also deal damage, I'm going to recommend the Vestal. I'm not going to drag her over there because currently I have her healing or locking in some quirks right now. But the reason we bring the Vestal rather than the Occultist is she has an ability based off the party composition I'm going to show you that allows her to do bonus damage versus Unholy. It reduces their damage and it also reduces their accuracy. Now this doesn't do a ton of damage, but it does get a bonus to Unholy, and you can run it in the 2nd slot. So this is the recommended method here. I'll kind of explain that in a minute, but she's going to go in the 3rd slot, or I'm sorry, in the 2nd slot. Now, she primarily will hang out in the 3rd slot, and I'll explain that in a second. But running in the 3rd slot is going to be your Crusader, and the Crusader is primarily going to be focused on speed. Reason being is the Crusader is going to start in the 3rd slot in Holy Lance. Many of you probably expected that when I said Crusader. And then in the 1st slot, we're going to run the Hellion, mainly because she's able to hit every row, able to eliminate the stress mobs in the back 2 rows pretty quickly. Her bleed of if it bleeds, which is one I think is really, really valuable, doesn't come into effect as much in this dungeon as it does others, but there are still humans that you can bleed with it. So what are some of the pros and cons? So the pro of the build is that these mobs, or these heroes rather, are able to really hit almost every monster in any form. It doesn't suffer from shuffle. Like if the party gets shuffled or surprised, it's fairly quick to move them back into position. The blights and the stuns that are available with this party composition makes it easy to manage damage if you choose to play it that way, not that you have to. And it's still balanced enough that a healer is able to still be able to be somewhat offensive and not have to always just heal through. So how does this work? So the original setup is that you're going to bring the Crusader in the 3rd slot and you're going to stack speed on him. You're hoping that ideally your Crusader has something like On Guard, or you give him something that allows him to go first. And you never want your healer really to have low speed, but her speed has to be lower, not significantly, but fairly lower than your Crusader. The reason is you want to run Holy Lance immediately so that he's able to move into the 2nd slot. Now, if that doesn't happen, and it won't sometimes, you can allow your Vestal to use the ability I just showed you, Hand of Light, which will at least provide some damage, and then debuff that mod so they're hopefully the mob, so they're not able to do as much damage to you. So that's kind of how the first few turns works in the party. Now you do have the option with the Plague Doctor to stun the back row, but the disadvantage of bringing the Plague Doctor is that they can't do enough direct damage to kill somebody on one turn, like for example, a Hellion would be able to, or maybe an Arbalist, where they could put out somebody in one turn. So you're going to have to kind of learn to play with either stunning on the first turn with her, stunning the back 2 rows, or just going right for damage. And it just depends on your trinkets, your play style, your composition, where your team is, and that's kind of how you'll tackle the combat turn by turn. Again, as always, you want to make sure to prioritize getting rid of the back 2 rows if they're the stress or damage dealers. Prioritize them and leave the front 2 rows up there. You can deal with those as soon as you get through the ones that are going to deal either the worst damage or the worst stress, depending on what your bottleneck is at the time. So, as we look individually at each one of the classes, we'll take a look at the Plague Doctor. So the Plague Doctor and what you want to bring, again, varies depending on your trinkets, your layouts, your play style. This is my recommended setup for the Ruins. So Noxious Blast, which is the Blight in the first 2 rows, single target. Plague Grenade, which is AoE Blight to the back 2 rows, and this is the one that you'll probably end up switching out depending on your play style. Blinding Gas, which is the stun for the back 2 rows. I'm going to ignore the bleed because you're going to go into an area where there primarily are skeletons and undead. There are a few humans, but not worth that risk. We're going to ignore Battlefield Medicine because where it does cure bleeds and blights, the bleeds aren't significant enough that you'd have to bring this combat skill. There's not enough value in it. You're going to bring Emboldening Vapors because there's going to be times where it's more valuable for you to buff either the Hellion or the Crusader than it is to act with her herself. And then Disorienting Blast, you're really only bringing this if you want to stun the second row, or if you have a problem with corpses. I personally do not, but some people really like to clear the corpses. They don't like them being in their way, so that's up to you guys. That completely will depend on your play style. When you look at her combat skills, or camping skills rather, they're really the weakest in the game in my opinion, or some of the weakest. I would take Encourage and Wound Care for sure, and then depending on what you're going to suffer with, you'll take one of these 3 here. You will take Self-Medicate in case she happens to get herself significantly damaged, and it also has a little stress heal here. But you aren't going to suffer really from diseases in this instance. You could bring these if you wanted to use her, and I typically do use her in this way, where somebody has a disease and I'm too cheap to want to repair it. I'll bring them with the Plague Doctor to the next instance I run. So that's an idea to do there to save you a little bit of money. But really there aren't a significant amount of camping skills that are going to matter for her, really. They don't, so we're not going to focus too much on those. Moving on to we'll go to the Crusader next because she would be in slot 3. These are the combat skills you're going to want to bring for the Crusader. Again, I'm not bringing stun, but you can depending on your play style if you want to stun the first 2 rows. You're going to bring Smite because it has the additional damage to Unholy, obviously. You're going to bring Zealous Accusation primarily because if you have a mob in one of the front 2 rows that you feel you can kill who's low HP and low health with 1 turn and do additional damage to the opposite mob or the other mob in the other row, you're going to use AoE rather than single target damage. Obviously, Holy Lance is predicated on most of this build, which does the additional damage to Unholy, a really high crit. Really high crit combat skill, one of the better ones in the game, even after the nerf. And then battle heals you don't have to take. You could take Inspiring Cry to kind of manage your stress heals a little bit if you get, if you find yourself working from behind in the stress heals. I mean, you can mark yourself and be more tanky with the Bulwark, but I don't feel a lot of value in it. I really feel these are probably your top 4 or top 5 looking here. Looking at the trinkets, whereas it doesn't matter as much of the Plague Doctor, here you do want to stack crit if you have it, or additional damage, because that's primarily his function with this layout. Okay, so looking at really the camping skills here, again, not really are required to take. I would say this Encourage, the Zealous Speech, and the Vigil are the ones that are the ones you want to bring, primarily because they're stress reduction. And we didn't bring a stress reduction character to really reduce stress outside of Inspiring Cry. We didn't bring like a Jester or a Houndmaster, so we're going to bring these knowing that we're going to have to cure that when we camp. Moving on to the Vestal. So looking at the Vestal, there's a couple different ways to play it since she is going to start in the second row. You could have brought Mace Bash, which is okay, and you could have brought the Stun, which also is okay, but I really think Hand of Light outshines Dazzling Light here because of the additional damage to Unholy, and it gives the possibility with the accuracy debuff that they're going to deliver, or receive rather, that they will not be able to attack or hit you on your first turn. They'll be able to attack, but they probably won't be able to hit you with the minus accuracy, at least in the lower levels. You're obviously going to bring your party heal, you're going to bring Divine Grace. Now, early on in the dungeon, I don't ever see a lot of people do this, where they can take an additional offensive spell rather than a healing spell. So consider that. Early on, you probably don't need to AoE heal. You could just single target heal if you had to, or vice versa. You can interchange these and take them off, and then just change them out in between fights. So consider that based off your playstyle. As far as her trinket selection, you don't have to focus too much on heals. This one does with the Sacred Scroll and the Tomb of Holy Healing. You don't have to, though, if you wanted to use her to help you stun or to do additional damage to Unholy. You could bring a different trinket for that. There's a ton of different ways to play her here, but my primary focus is keep it simple, stupid, use her to heal. That's what she's there for. As far as her camping skills, this is one of the cons of this build. The Vestal camping skills really shine when you have religious characters. So we didn't bring a Jester, unfortunately, and we didn't really bring the Leper. Since we don't have those, we don't really have the added benefit that a lot of these skill sets will use, so or will benefit from. So I'm saying this is probably the recommended setup here for her, and you really won't need this. I mean, you really won't, but this is the recommended setup. And then these guys, based off of how many religious characters you're bringing, is based off how successful they are. You don't really need Sanctuary because we already took the Vigil from the Crusader. You could even bring Pep Talk in this case if you wanted to. But again, her camping skills aren't really going to be great in this build or this party composition because you really don't have the religious characters that are required. Moving on to the Hellion. So the Hellion, you can bring a few different ways. You can bring a few different, or take a few different stances with her. And again, mine primarily focus on being able to hit the fourth row as a must, so you need Iron Swan. Wicked Hack is a must, obviously, because you need the front two rows. If it bleeds, I'm taking, because there are some human mobs, like the stress dealers that are human, the females that are in the ruins here. And then Stun, it's pretty situational. Another one to take could be Breakthrough. You consider that. Adrenaline Rush is another option. You don't need to, but you could take it because of the additional heal. You get the damage buff. You get the ability to cure the bleeds that might run into them. I mean, this is pretty good, but it wastes a turn of her dealing damage, which is her main purpose. But Bleed Out, you definitely don't want to take, because in the front row, they're usually not humans. Usually there's skeletons in the front row. There are a couple cases where the humans will be in the front row, but this really doesn't perform well in the ruins, in my opinion. Again, you're bringing high crit. That's what you're looking for with her. As highest crit as you can find as far as the trinkets go. Surgical Gloves is a really good trinket with her, and also the Ancestor's Pen if you happen to have it. If you don't, try and stack crit or high damage. As far as her camping skills, this is pretty much the recommended layout. Sharpened Spear is a must. You have to do this every time you camp. It's one of the best, if not the best, camping skills in the game. Reject the Gods is another good one, depending on the situation of the stress in the party. You might be able to reject the Gods with her and then use somebody else to manage the rest of the party's stress. This is another reason where she conflicts with the Vestal, is if you can read here, if they're not religious, it only increases their stress by 7. Obviously the Vestal's religious, so it's going to increase the stress by 15. So is the Crusader, so that's going to hurt. Then the last one you're taking is Battle Trance, which is really a buff for her as long as she's in position 1. So that's kind of an overview on how the party, what you're going to take with the party and the recommendations. As you begin to look through a lot of the playstyle that I favor, you guys know it's very aggressive, and I don't really choose stuns unless it's if I'm out of position, and that's really what I have to run. So as you play this, there's a few changes you can make to the build, and that's something I'll kind of go over fairly quickly. One of the other recommendations would be to bring, hey, I want to bring, an occultist instead. And the occultist instead of a Vestal is fine here. You're really going to use them to pull the mobs to the front, or use his AoE in the back 2 rows. The Abyssal Artillery, you're going to use the Abyssal Artillery to knock out some of the back 2 rows on the first turn, and then from there I'd recommend bringing things to the front, or if you have corpses, this would obviously eliminate those. They do have a stun. There's a lot of different ways you can play him, but that would be one of the replacements that's commonly utilized instead of the Vestal. So hopefully these were helpful for you guys. The next one I'm going to be working on, and I actually have the script written already, is the Cove. So that's the one you'll see next. So hopefully that's where we'll be going next. Please let me know in the comments what you want to see moving forward. And I think earlier in the video I mentioned that the Jester is religious. He is not a religious character. That was me misspeaking. I meant to say the Crusader. So sorry about that, guys. Anyway, I will see you in the next video. Thank you guys for all the support and for watching. See ya.